All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today, I want to talk about the principles and practice of leadership. So, um, why am I doing this topic? I'm a fourth-year resident of ENT, and I've never held any major leadership role, so I don't have that, any necessarily any qualifications for this, but as I'm entering and kind of have entered the upper levels of residency, um, I felt more of a burden on my shoulders to understand what it means to be a leader and take on more of a leadership role as people are starting to look towards you for answers, direction. You're in charge a little bit more. And I think as MDs, it's part of being a doctor. Leadership is just a part of that. Whether you're the leader in the OR, whether you own a practice, um, or in society, there's people tend to look at you for leadership simply because of your education. And I think that's important to be a part of your education, is to take on some level of a leadership role and to learn about it. And I don't, like I said, I don't have much experience in leadership, but I've always felt it's something that can be learned. And I've never felt this idea of being a born leader. I've always felt that was garbage, and that leadership can be learned just like we're learning ENT or learning, a new hobby, learning snowboarding. If you put in the time and the effort, I think it's something that you can become better at. Um, so I started with what is on PubMed, like what are people doing out there? And it's definitely a growing subject amongst programs, residency programs. A lot of people are starting to put together leadership programs, leadership curriculums for their residents, as more and more leaders are recognizing the importance of leadership being a part of the development of a good doctor. There's a 2017 study that looked at ENT programs, and they found about half, 48%, thought that they weren't leaders. And then there was a 2020 Mayo Clinic study where they looked at all their residents within Mayo Clinic, over 1,000 of them, and they did a survey based on how they would rate the leadership within their program. And they found that decreased leadership scores were associated with decreased satisfaction, increased burnout, increased emotional exhaustion. So it's a big part of our lives as MDs. And so that's why I really wanted to address it today. Okay, so over the last 3 months is when I started to really get into this. And I've read several books and listened to books, audiobooks, podcasts. What I really wanted to do is look at a lot of different industries and how leaders from several different industries and how different people approach leadership. So the main three people that I'm drawing from for this talk is this person here is Andy Stanley. He's a pastor of North Point Community Church in Atlanta. It's a ginormous church, over tens of thousands of members with several different branches. He's very well known in the Christian community and a very good speaker. And so he has several series on leadership. And this is Brene Brown. The book I read was Dare to Lead. She has a PhD in social work and has spent most of her career learning about leadership, interviewing leaders, and putting on leadership conferences. So she's kind of made a whole career out of leadership. And then this person over here, the ride of a lifetime, is Bob Iger. For those of you who don't know who Bob Iger is, he was the CEO of the Walt Disney Company for the last 15 years. He started in 2005 and went through this past year. He's now the chairman, one of the chairmen. He was the one that orchestrated the purchases of Pixar, Marvel Studios, Star Wars, Fox. He started Disney Plus. I mean, he massively expanded Disney and had an incredible run. And his stock price, I think, went from 27 when he took over to closer to 180 now. I mean, he blew up the Walt Disney Company. He started the Shanghai Disney World in China during a time when America and China wasn't getting along. You know, so an incredible accomplishments. And what was interesting in his prologue is when he's kind of introducing himself, is he mentions that for the longest time he didn't write a book because he didn't feel qualified to talk about leadership. So it just it was an amazing example of how difficult this subject is, and how even someone as accomplished as Bob Iger feels like they still have a lot to learn about leadership. So the main three qualities I want to talk with you about today is clarity, courage, and maturity. So let's start with clarity. So clarity, the obvious part of clarity is being a good communicator. Every good leader that you've been around, they can communicate well, they speak well. But going beyond that, it's also about setting the right expectations. And there's this idea about establishing what the finished product looks like. So for example, let's say person A wants to set up a patient for the OR. He asks person B to set them up in a couple months and get them ready for surgery. A couple months rolls by, person A gets a phone call the day before surgery, and they say, oh, he's hasn't been, you know, he had to cancel the surgery. He's not ready. He didn't get his medical clearance. He didn't get a CT scan. You know, whatever it is. And so now what happens? Person A is upset, right? Now person A is upset. He's frustrated that, you know, his schedule's off. He's upset with person B because they didn't get the job done that he expected. Person B's upset, right? You know, person B didn't feel like they weren't told what they needed to be done. They're embarrassed. They're frustrated themselves. The patient's upset that they thought they were going to have surgery. They've been waiting for 2 months and now it's not happening. Now let's rewind back to the beginning. If person A had said to person B, get this patient set up for the surgery in a couple months, person B responds, sure, I'll do it. Then person A follows up and says, so he'll need consent. You have to add him onto the schedule. He needs medical clearance from his primary, and he needs to get a CT scan. Now person B understands, okay, so I need to make sure he gets that medical clearance. I need to follow up and make sure the CT got done. Person A says, yes, exactly. So that is what establishing expectations in a finished product looks like. And that extra 15 seconds, 30 seconds of conversation can avoid such a frustrating day and frustrations amongst several people, right? So that's what being clear about expectations and what a finished product is all about. And then being honest with your employees, your business partners, and being clear with them. Bob Iger talks about when he took over for Disney, they were at they had a really bad relationship with Pixar when he took over. Steve Jobs looked at Disney as a poorly run company. He didn't like their leadership. He thought they were just filled with bureaucrats and he couldn't work with them. That's the relationship they had when Bob Iger took over. The first thing he did was call Steve Jobs. Several months later, Disney was purchasing Pixar from Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs cites Bob Iger's clarity in the negotiations and being honest about his expectations. And that was the only reason they were able to get a deal done. And that's what Iger cites as the most important thing throughout these major purchases that have changed the face of entertainment, was that he was clear about expectations and honest throughout the negotiations. And that's how things got done. So major importance here for just being honest and clear and setting the expectations. Then there's this idea that in society where we think that If someone messes up at work, they're embarrassed, maybe they're having a hard time at home, that, oh, we'll just, I don't know what they're going through. I'll just let them kind of deal with it. I don't want to step on any toes. And you're being kind by not addressing the situation. And that's just not true. Like, people aren't stupid. They know when you're avoiding and tiptoeing around a conversation. And so being clear, being upfront, is kind. Being unclear is unkind. And people really appreciate when you take things head on. And that rolls into not gossiping, not talking back behind people. Let's go back to the example. Person A, now they're upset with person B because they didn't get the job done that was expected. And then they go and talk with person C and say, oh, person B, they're so incompetent, they couldn't handle this simple thing, and they go off on person B, talking behind their back. And again, in society, we tend to think like, oh, if we tell someone a secret about someone, they'll trust us because we're telling something that no one else knows. And it's just not true. Like, person C isn't gonna, oh, I can trust person A now because he's gossiping about person B. No, person C's thought is, I have to be careful around person A because I have to be careful what I say because he'll go blab into the whole office about a mistake I made or something I said. And so it just deteriorates the trust in the whole practice. And that's where trust is built. It's built in those small moments. It's built in those little moments of honesty and being clear with someone and setting expectations. It's not a big dramatic moment like in a movie where all of a sudden, oh, now I trust you. No, it's built in the small moments of being clear and addressing things head on. Then the last thing I'll say about clarity is patients, we see it all the time, right? Patients crave certainty, and we see it all the time. They want this guarantee that, oh, doc, if we do this, it's going to fix it, right? If we do this, it's going to cure it, right? And it's like, no, you can't provide certainty. You can't see the future. You don't know what the future holds. So because you can't provide certainty, you have to be able to provide clarity. And you have to be clear with what the plan is, what the expectations are. You can't give them any guarantees, but you can be clear with them. And that goes with the patients, but also your employees, your business strategy, your investment plans, your dealings with your business partners, all of that. So let's move on to courage. So courage is, again, the classic example of this is, a soldier in battle, being brave in battle. He had, courageous in battle. And then from the business side of it, it's not being scared to take risks, not being scared to take a chance. And that's part of it. But there's more to being a courageous leader than just that. Let's talk about this example. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. That is a quote from Joseph Campbell. He was a writer and philosopher in the mid 1900s and was very well respected in the artist community, in the film community. And one of those people that really liked his work was George Lucas. And George Lucas, who wrote and directed the original Star Wars series, he wrote a scene specifically based on this quote. So for those of you that haven't seen Star Wars, God help you. Everyone should watch Star Wars. Even if you don't like sci-fi stuff, just for your own social intelligence, you should watch Star Wars. But there's a scene in The Empire Strikes Back. There's a lot of good scenes where Luke and Yoda, and they have their Jedi training scenes. They're very good. But one of them, Luke's running with Yoda on his back. He's doing flips through the woods, and they sit down to take a break. And Luke looks over and sees this cave, and he asks, what's in there? Yoda says the dark side of the Force is strong in there. And he's like, well, what's in there? And Yoda says something like, only that which you take with you. And he starts walking in there, and he, straps on his gun, his lightsaber, and Yoda says, you won't need them. But he goes in anyways. Darth Vader, or an illusion of Darth Vader, comes around the corner. They have a lightsaber battle. Luke cuts off his head. The head falls to the ground. The mask pops off, and it's Luke's face. And the point of this is based on this quote: "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." Luke wanted nothing else than to be a Jedi. That's what he wanted. But he couldn't become a Jedi until he faced who he was, faced where he came from, and faced who his father was. And later in the third one, Yoda tells him that, you're not a Jedi until you face Darth Vader. And so the point of that story is that people want this practice to be run where your employees work hard, they take the initiative, they're not lazy, they respect you, they trust you, they look to you for guidance. All those things that you want, you can't get them if you're avoiding what you fear. And that's being able to live in vulnerability and have the courage to face those tough moments. Face the courage to face your own mistakes, your own critiques, admit when you're wrong. Think of how embarrassing it is when you mess up, when you forget to do something, and your first thought is to brush it under the rug, hope no one notices. It's like, no, people aren't stupid. They know when you're messing up, when you're hiding things, and you have to have the courage as the leader and the doctor to brave into those moments, admit you are wrong. And it's hard, but you have to do it so you can set the example for your employees. Teddy Roosevelt had a quote a lot of you probably know. He gave a speech in 1910 about the man in the arena. And it was this idea that, you can't be in the stands. You can't be up in the stands looking down the people playing the game and critiquing them and telling them when they're doing something wrong. No, you're not going to earn people's respect that way. You have to be in the arena, playing the game, taking your own critiques, taking your own criticism, admitting when you yourself are wrong. You can't just be up in the stands and point fingers. And then going beyond the idea of just admitting your mistakes, but also addressing the tough conversation, when people are upset. We like to think home and work can be separated, and to some extent they can, but there's always some rollover there. You carry things with you. If you're having a tough time at home, you carry it into work sometimes. Or if something at work happens, you made a mistake and now you're embarrassed, and every time you show up to work, you feel ashamed. You have to, as the leader, be able to face those conversations, because you're going to deal with it regardless. If someone's upset, they're embarrassed, they're shamed, they're emotional, that's going to result in poor performance and passive aggressive behavior. So regardless of whether you address it up front, you're going to deal with it, either the results of it, or you can deal with it up front and address it from the beginning. And avoiding the tough conversation isn't going to help anything. You have to have the courage to face those conversations and connect with people. The quality, I thought this was interesting, that leaders cite as the most underrated quality consistently across all these different people that I read, across many different industries over the last 3 months. Quality most underrated that they cited was empathy. Being able to live in the moment with someone and connect with them. It's different from sympathy. Sympathy is you feel bad for them. Oh, you poor thing. No, we're talking about you don't necessarily have to understand the experience that they had, but you have to be able to understand the feeling of the experience. You don't compare, you're not trying to fix it. You're just leaning into that moment and connecting with that person. And that's where, like I said before, the trust is built, the relationship's built, and they view you more as the leader that they want. Okay, maturity. So the classic example is the immature teen, right? Everyone knows how the teenager is so immature, that immature teenager, but we also know adults, right, that are immature. Like we could think of people where like, God, they're acting like a child, And as a leader, you have to have a certain level of maturity about you. It's not just sorry, let me backtrack. Oh yeah, so immature people tend to pretend they know things. When they don't know something, they try and pretend they know it because they don't have the courage to admit that they don't. They don't seek wise counsel. They're too proud. Whereas mature people have a certain self-awareness about them, and they tend to be thoughtful, focused, decisive. Think of that person where you're an adult, I'm 29, 28, 29, you're 35, 40 years old, and you're thinking about this person, your friend, your colleague, and you're like, man, I want to be like them when I'm older. When I grow up, I want to be like them. It's because they have this certain maturity about them and this certain self-awareness. And you can't understand other people's weaknesses, strengths, their talents if you're not in tune with your own strengths, weaknesses, and talents, and know where you need help and know when to ask for help. And leaders tend to be more optimistic. I don't think you can be a strong leader and be pessimistic. If you're always worried about, oh, this is gonna crash and burn, this is gonna go right, but let's try anyway. Like no one wants to follow that person. You have to be optimistic about the future, about your plans, about the direction of the business. But then you also have to be optimistic about the people you're working with. So, for example, attendings, think about a resident that you've had issues with, or residents, think about a med student or a co-resident maybe, where you're like, man, they're just being lazy. They don't understand what's going on. They keep messing up, and if in your head, instead of blaming them as being lazy, not studying hard enough, not working hard enough, instead in your head, you were optimistic about who you thought they were and said, let's assume they're trying their best. If they're trying their best, they're working their very hardest. Now it's on your shoulders to figure out, okay, if they're trying their hardest, then what am I doing wrong? What am I not teaching them? What am I not doing to train them well enough? And it totally flips the script on you pushing them off as incompetent and taking the responsibility now for what you need to do to help them to get the job done. As the leader, as the doctor, it's on your shoulders, right? You're in charge, and we all know this. Like, this is the doctor, you're to blame for everything that goes wrong with the patient, and if you own your practice, with the practice. So you have to take the responsibility on your shoulders of figuring out, well, if they're trying their best, let's assume they're trying their best, what do I need to help them? And then this idea of their authority is temporary. Again, mature people tend to understand the moment that they're in and be appreciative of the moment. And immature people tend to have more of this entitled feel. They finished this residency at this great program, they did this fellowship with this great person, and now they're entitled to this income. I deserve this income. I deserve this equipment. I deserve people listening to me, telling me, or me being able to tell them what to do, because I've done accomplished all this stuff. And there's no entitlement about being a good leader. Like, everyone should understand that their leadership, their influence is temporary. It's not going to last forever. And you don't have people, my employees, these are my people, these are, you don't have people, you have a responsibility to people. And you have to understand that this is really about serving. If you were just had people that you dictated to, you're a dictator, you're a king. We're not talking about royalty here, we're talking about leadership. And you have a responsibility to people. You're not there to just be served, you're there to serve. And then mature people tend to have integrity. They say what they mean and they mean what they say. When they say they're going to do something, they do it. You can trust them. When they say they're going to do something, they're going to do it. Again, think of that resident that's been great, or that med student that's been awesome, and they just have a certain level of maturity about them, that when they say they're going to do something, you can trust they're going to do it. And that's what integrity is. And they, good enough is not good enough. You don't want to be a perfectionist. You don't want to demand perfection, but you can demand the pursuit of perfection. And that's a big difference in the way you address your employees, your med students, residents, partners, whoever you're dealing with. Is you want to pursue perfection. You don't want to demand perfection, because it's just not attainable. And they can admit when you're wrong, and when someone else is wrong and they're honest about it, you're kind to that person because they've been honest about it. So having that self-awareness is a huge part of being a strong leader. So this is a list of 100 values. If all of you can look through these and come up with things that you pay attention to what is connecting with you. Things that stand out as real important. Of these 100 values, which ones are the most valuable to you? Is it success? Is it teamwork? Is it being the best? Is it ambition, efficiency, financial stability, all these things? And if you start looking through there, 15, 20 of them might pop out to you as, oh yes, I really value teamwork above all else, or wisdom, or learning, inclusion, whatever it is for you. There might be 15 or 20 of them that pop out. What is interesting is among leaders, they say that you can only really base your decisions, the direction you're leading people, it can really only be centered around 2 of these. So even though 15 or 20 might pop out to you, you really have to narrow it down to only 2. And you have to simplify it down to just 2 things where, like, above all else, we are going to care about in my practice about this and this, or when I'm having a tough decision about what direction to take things, it's going to be based on this and this. And it's really only 2, which is pretty hard to do. It took me a lot of self-reflection and thoughtfulness over several days to figure out which 2 were mine. And for example, family, faith, financial stability, all these things, altruism, serving, all these things are really important to me, but some of those things fall under just 2, which is responsibility and simplicity for me. Responsibility, I think everyone's accountable for their actions, their choices, no excuses, no finger pointing. It's your responsibility to pursue excellence, to be fair, to be altruistic. And it's sometimes why I struggle with empathy, because why do I need to connect with this person? They should be able to do this. It's their responsibility. No excuses. Get the job done, right? And so that's something that I have to be aware of. And then the other thing for me is simplicity. As much as I value wisdom, knowledge, learning, really, to me, if you can't explain it simply, if you don't understand it in simple terms, I don't know if you really understand it, if you really know it. One of the reasons I keep coming back to financial stability, for example, is because of how simple it is. Don't over leverage yourself from a business standpoint. Don't go into too much debt that you're not going to be able to get out of it. Keep things simple. People understand it better. People will learn it better. And so for me, those are 2 big ones for me, but everyone can be different and there's no wrong answer here. but it comes back to that maturity and that self-awareness of understanding what are the two most important things to you that you're going to center your leadership role around. Okay, so in conclusion, 3 main qualities we talked about today: courage, clarity, and maturity. I think leadership can be learned, it can be practiced, and you have to approach it as if you're approaching anything. You know, if we practice ENT, right? We're learning about being a doctor, and leadership is a part of that. And it's not something you have to be born with. And if you feel you're a bad leader now, it's something that can be improved. It just takes some time, some self-reflection, and intention. And like I said before, it's ultimately about serving. You know, you're not the doctor because you want to be in charge and tell people what to do. Like all that you're going to achieve with that kind of attitude is resentment and overturning your employees and some backlash amongst your colleagues, because no one likes that sort of entitlement. So it's really about serving and not being a dictator. You're there to help people, you know, be optimistic, communicate, set expectations, approach things head on when you're critiquing someone. Get in the arena. You can't stay up in the stands. And I liked this quote from Andy Stanley: wisdom to know what's right, and courage to do what's right. And that's what you really want in a leader, right? They know what to do and they have the courage to do it. They're not going to shy away. They're not going to be scared. And that's how a lot of leaders are, right? You see it where people lead out of fear. They're going to make a decision because they're scared this will happen. You know, they don't want this to happen, so they're going to do this. It's like, you can't lead out of fear. You have to lead with courage and brave into something, whatever that decision is. And then just finally, I think where this really leadership became simple for me was throughout reading all these books and listening to all these podcasts. It struck me several times throughout the last 3 months where I was listening to something about a leadership quality, and I was like, man, if I did that as a parent, I'd be a better parent. If I did that as a husband, I'd be a better husband. If I did that as a friend, I'd be a better friend. And it kind of clicked that being a good leader is really about being a good person in a lot of ways. And there's so much overlap there. And for me, that really helped me to demystify leadership, because we hear about leadership all the time, you know, in sports, business. Oh, he's a leader of men. He's just a leader of the team. You know, what does that mean? What does it mean to be a leader? And I think for me, it demystified this leadership term to understand that, oh, that's why, my role model is good at everything. You know, that's why that person I look up to is great at his job. He's a great husband. He's a great dad. He's a great friend. Like, how can they be good at everything? It's because there's so much overlap. And if you want to be a good leader, don't make it mutually exclusive to, oh, this is how I'm going to do things at work. And it's totally different at home. It's totally different with friends. It's totally different with my colleagues. It's like, no, there's qualities that overlap with both. And it takes having some self-reflection and awareness, maturity, the clarity, and the courage to be good at all of it, and connect with people. And that's how you'll become a better leader, I believe. So that's it. It's short. That's all I got. I wanted to just give you what I've learned over the last 3 months, and hopefully that was helpful.
That was wonderful. I just have a couple comments. One of the books, I got myself involved in a lot of nonprofits, my faith organizations. And I have to say, it's kind of an extension of who you are when you're a person in medicine. You're kind of a person who wants to make the world a better place for individuals and groups and beyond, I guess. And so you do get involved in things and giving back.
Yeah.
There's one of the books I read when I was looking at trying to understand leadership was, of course, Sheryl Sandberg's book. And for the women who are there, you know, we always say no because we think it's just taking on one more thing that we can't do. And she really encourages people to not say no, but, you know, lean in, as she said, or say yes and enter, challenge yourself and see where you stand. You're not going to, when you're in a leadership role, you don't necessarily become president and vice president and on the executive committee at first. You begin maybe in some committees, and then you move on to the board, and then maybe the executive board, and then maybe into vice president and president of that board. I would, anybody getting involved with nonprofits, I want you to really look carefully at the professional members of the board. So there are people who are paid to really have a vision for the organization, and the better those professionals are, the better the volunteer people can be. So you want to have a really creative professional team for your so that you as a volunteer can really watch the organization grow and help it with its mission and vision. There's a lot of people who have, like, we all feel, I don't know if everybody does, but there's like this imposter syndrome. I think that's what the Jedi thing is that you were kind of talking about, because I'm not as much into Star Wars maybe, but
That's all right.
the imposter syndrome is, you know, fake it till you make it kind of thing. And how do you begin to feel like you really are making a contribution and you're worth being in a leadership position? Are you really worthy of that leadership position? And, you know, I think that's normal. It's a normal feeling, and you do have to grow into some of these roles. So you do have to enter at some point. I think that the generations after the boomers are really entering it sooner. People want to have understand the needs of generations. You know, not everybody on the board should be retired on any particular board or leadership. They need to know what's happening on the ground with everyone so that can change. So it's important to get involved in leadership sooner than you think you can, and probably when you think you're not worthy. And it is a learning. There's a lot of learning to it. Also in leadership, it's a lot of listening. A good leader listens 80% of the time. And you know, and also gratefulness to the people who've come on this journey with you, and being really grateful and calling them out for that too, making sure they know how grateful they came to the meeting, they contributed to the meeting, and they did what the expectation was from the last meeting.
Yeah, to go off what you're saying, Dr. Danziger, thank you for that. You got to trust your talent, right? You know, like if you're a part of like you're saying, a volunteer organization, and having working with people, hiring people, you got to be able to trust that talent and realize you're not the smartest person in the room. You're not the only one with good ideas. You have to be able to listen to them and trust in them as well, right?
Right.
I also, could I just say something about that slide with the 100 values on it?
Yeah.
So Iris just talked about mission and vision. And all right, we're not all going to be CMOs or CEOs, but we're all going to be involved in setting missions. Like, what's the mission of the residency program? What's the mission of my practice going to be? And the best missions, and it's a leadership thing to set a mission. The best missions, you're right, Sam, are simple. People talk about Southwest Airlines. Our mission, lower fares, period. You know, and if you sit in a room with some people and you say, what's our mission going to be? It's impossible to say no to any of these things. Like accountability. Oh yeah, that's important. Let's put it in there. Trust. Yeah, that's important. Let's put it in there. No, you got to like really zero in on who you are. Who are we? What are we trying to accomplish? And it's not easy. It's extremely important, but it's not easy sometimes. So that was a great slide. I love that slide.
Yeah, thank you. It really is amazing when you see these giant companies and they have, you know, 5-word mission statements.
Right.
Like, how's that
Those
possible?
are the best.
So yeah, it's their whole, they center around everything about just a couple ideas, 1 or 2, you know. So thank you. Yeah. Any
Thanks
other
so much,
thoughts,
Sam. Any
questions?
other questions
you know,
or comments?
I will say that there's times where being a leader is just stepping up. You know, you're not like going out of your way to be a leader. You're just doing your thing, and you're, you know, really trying to mind your own business. So I'm looking up this quote from Jerry Garcia from the Grateful Dead. And he says, somebody needs to do something. It's just incredibly pathetic. It has to be us. So there's times in life where it's incredibly pathetic that it has to be you to do something. But there's times where you just got to step up and be like, okay, you know, I'll do this. I'll go to this meeting, I'll go whatever. And, you know, that's the leadership there. It's not like somebody's spent their whole life trying to get into a you know, be it a position of power, position of government, position of, you know, president or whatever. Sometimes it's just a matter of, all right, I'll take care of it because nobody else is. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but that's, at least to me, that's how things often kind of work out as far as, you know, my scope of leadership.
Nice job,
Yeah,
Sam.
really good point.
Um,
Thank you.
I'm going to offer a challenge to everybody. Talk to 3 people today who you don't think have accepted the fact that they need a vaccine. Tell them what you've heard from Jens's talks and see if you can convince them to go get a vaccine. I've been doing it in my office, and it's really an incredibly interesting profile of what's going on out there. Gives you a little courage, a little bit of leadership from what you do every day, and take a challenge, which is, sounds simple, but it'll teach you a lot.
Yeah, I give the same talk this at noon today to our office personnel trying to spread the news, but they asked me for it, so it's just to explain to them in relatively, hopefully easy language that all those myths out there are really not valid. Go out there, spread the news. I'm with you, Robin.
I like
Right.
it.
On the slide, if you don't want to pick 2, there's this book. Oh, no, wrong book. There's this book. You can take a quiz that comes with the book, and it identifies 2 or 4 of them. And they kind of divide it up into different categories. Like there's influencing traits, there's like emotional traits, and all this other stuff. So if you want a different book, this is another one.
I like it. That's cool.
Can you go to your immaturity slide, or maturity slide rather?
Yes.
So self-awareness is one part of, I would say, an umbrella term called emotional intelligence. And so then there's this book.
Yep.
So emotional intelligence is 4 things. You have self-awareness and self-management, but you should also be socially aware and be able to really manage different relationships. So if you want to look at the more umbrella term, emotional intelligence, this is professed by our current Academy president. So Carol Bradford recommends
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, that term came up a few different times across the books. And I like it a lot. You know, I like the term maturity, but emotional intelligence is really good to help people understand. But yeah, thank you, Adrian.
Did you watch The Bachelorette?
No.
No.
That's what Bennett was talking about.
Who?
Why are you watching The Bachelorette?
Or Tasha about how Spencer has emotional intelligence. I just have to watch The Bachelorette.
Question your viewing choices, Dr. Nagy.
It's been slow in the Navy.
Oh, that's great. All right, well, thank you, everyone.
Well, thank
Appreciate it.
you.